Your life is not defined by the years on your tombstone, but by the dash in between, the choices you make and the hearts you touch every single day. Welcome back to the show. It is good to have you here. Today, I want to take a step back from the noise. You know the noise I'm talking about. The notifications, the deadlines, the constant, low-level hum of anxiety that seems to be the background track of modern life. I want to take you into a space of deep reflection. A space where we can dismantle the engine of our daily lives and look at the parts to see how it actually runs. We are going to do a deep dive into a book that, on the surface, sounds like just another self-help title. It's called Sống Đam Mê, or Living with Passion, by Mac Anderson. But if you think this is just about finding your bliss, or some fluffy, sugar-coated advice, you are mistaken. This is a manual on the mechanics of the human spirit. It is a treatise on how to stop sleepwalking through your existence and start actually driving the car. We have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to talk about the architecture of attitude, the physics of resilience, the biology of laughter, and the philosophy of simplicity. So settle in. Let's get to work. I want to start with a question. When you woke up this morning, did you make a choice about how you were going to feel? Or did you just let the morning happen to you? Mac Anderson opens his philosophy with a story that perfectly encapsulates this dilemma. He tells us about a man named Sam. Sam is a hotel receptionist. Now, historically, being a hotel receptionist isn't exactly the kind of job people write epics about. It's repetitive. It's demanding. You deal with tired, grumpy travelers all day. It is the definition of a routine existence. But Anderson notices something about Sam. Sam isn't just polite, he is electric. He exudes this genuine, infectious joy. When Anderson asks him, "Sam, how do you do it? How are you this happy doing this job?" Sam drops a line that is the cornerstone of this entire discussion. He says, "For me, every day in this world is wonderful." Now pause. That sounds simple, right? Maybe even a little naive. But peel back the layers. Sam isn't saying the world is wonderful. He isn't saying the guests are wonderful. He's saying that his experience of the day is wonderful because he decided it would be. Anderson uses this to argue that we have two fundamental choices when we face the world. We can be gloomy, acting like emotional black holes that suck the energy out of the room, or we can be enthusiastic, acting as generators that lift people up. The critical insight here, and this is the part we often miss, is that Sam's happiness wasn't a personality trait he was born with. Like blue eyes or being tall. It was a discipline. It was a gift he chose to share. This is the miracle maker. Enthusiasm transforms the mundane into the meaningful. But how do we cultivate that? Because let's be honest, some days you don't feel like Sam. Some days you feel like the world is out to get you. Anderson takes us into the law of the universe, or what I like to call the physics of expectation. He brings up this beautiful Native American legend, the story of the two wolves. You've probably heard it, but I want you to really listen to it again in this context. A grandfather tells his grandson that inside every person, a war is raging between two wolves. One wolf is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, and greed. The other wolf is joy, peace, love, hope, and kindness. The boy asks, "Which wolf wins?" And the grandfather says, "The one you feed." It's a haunting metaphor, isn't it? Every thought you have is a scoop of food. Anderson likens our thoughts to seeds. If you plant tomato seeds, you get tomatoes. You don't get cucumbers. If you plant thoughts of bitterness, you harvest a bitter life. It is cause and effect. He leans on the work of Dr. Norman Vincent Peale here, arguing that expecting the best isn't just optimism, it's a bridge. It's a mechanism. When you expect the best, you send a signal of self-respect to your own psyche. You are telling yourself, "I am worthy of a good outcome." And strangely enough, the world often rearranges itself to meet that expectation. So, we have the internal attitude sorted. We are feeding the good wolf. We are choosing enthusiasm. But what is the metric for success? If we do all this, what are we trying to achieve? This brings us to one of the most profound concepts in the book, something Anderson calls the dash. He references a poem by Linda Ellis. Picture a tombstone. You have the name. Then you have the date of birth, a hyphen, and the date of death. Anderson argues that we spend our entire lives obsessed with the two dates, the duration. How long did we live? But the dates don't matter. The only thing that matters is that little line in the middle. The dash. That dash represents every conversation you ever had, every time you forgave someone, every time you lost your temper, every time you helped a stranger. Success, in this redefined view, isn't about the accolades you hang on your wall. It's about the emotional residue you leave on other people. It shifts the metric from achievement, which is solitary, to impact, which is communal. And how do we maximize that dash? It turns out, it's not through grand gestures. You don't need to build a library or cure a disease to have a significant dash. You just need to smile. Anderson tells a story of two cashiers. Same store, same job, same likely wage. Cashier 1 is a young woman who jokes with him, saying she's charging extra for the smile. She wishes there was a newspaper that only printed good news. She lights him up. He leaves the store feeling lighter. Cashier 2, on a different day, does the exact same mechanical task but with a cold, weary attitude. She makes him feel like a burden. Think about the ripple effect of that. Cashier 1 didn't just scan groceries, she changed the chemical composition of Anderson's brain for the next few hours. He probably went home and was nicer to his wife because of it. That is power. That is the compass Anderson talks about. Every morning you have to look in the mirror and ask, who do I want to be today? The grump or the joy bringer? It sounds small, but over a lifetime, that choice defines your legacy. Now, I can hear the skeptics. That's great, but change is hard. I have bad habits. I'm wired this way. Anderson meets us there with a discussion on courage and the mastery of habit. And I love that he pairs courage with habit. Usually, we pair courage with war or danger. But he argues that the quietest, most intense courage is required simply to change a behavior. He uses a football analogy from his high school days. The first 2 weeks of training were hell. Physical agony. But he persisted, and eventually, the pain became strength. He includes a poem about habit that personifies it. Habit says, I am not a machine, but I work with the precision of a machine and the intelligence of a man. I can be your greatest servant, or your heaviest burden. Breaking a bad habit, smoking, procrastination, negative self-talk, causes distress. Your body literally fights you. It wants homeostasis. Courage is the door you have to open from the inside to walk through that distress. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable to become the person you want to be. And to sustain that courage, you need a goal. You need direction. There's this incredible story Anderson shares about his freshman year in college. He took a job selling books door to door. 60 hours a week. Brutal rejection. His own father told him he wouldn't make it. And honestly, he was terrified. He wanted to quit. So, what did he do? He sat down and wrote a letter to himself. He wrote a contract with his own soul, promising that he would be persistent, that he would make himself proud. He kept that letter in his pocket. Whenever a door was slammed in his face, he touched the paper. The result? He finished 7th out of thousands of student sellers. Why does this matter? Because a goal without a plan and without self-affirmation is just a vague dream. That letter was the anchor. It proves that we can push past our perceived limits, and past the doubts of our loved ones, if we have a clear definition of what we are fighting for. Now, as we move deeper into the book, into what we might call the action phase, Anderson shifts gears. We've established the mindset. Now, how do we maintain the machine? He talks about the physiology of optimism. Specifically, laughter. Did you know there is a biological imperative to laugh? Anderson claims we need to laugh at least 12 times a day to maintain health. It clears the heaviness from the brain. He tells the story of a Southwest Airlines pilot who joked that a 99-year-old passenger was on her first flight, turning the whole cabin into a party. This isn't just about being funny. It's about survival. Laughter boosts the immune system. It creates a state of euphoria that allows you to tackle problems. If you are grim-faced all day, grinding your teeth, you are physically degrading your ability to succeed. Humor is a strategic advantage. But what happens when laughter isn't enough? What happens when the bottom falls out? This is where faith and resilience come in. Anderson doesn't just say, "Have faith." He gives us the receipts. He walks us through the Hall of Fame of failure. Walt Disney? Bankrupt 5 times. Helen Keller? Deaf and blind yet refused pity. Mark Victor Hansen? You know, the chicken soup for the soul guy. Rejected by 35 publishers. 35. Can you imagine the walk to the car after the 34th rejection? Most of us would have burned the manuscript. But the 36th said yes. 75 million copies later, nobody remembers the rejections. And then there is Lincoln. The timeline Anderson lays out for Abraham Lincoln is staggering. Failed business in 31. Defeated for legislature in 32. Failed business again in 33. Fiancé died in 35. Nervous breakdown in 36. Defeated. 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 President in 1860. The argument here is that resilience is not about avoiding the storm. It's about how you set your sails. Faith, whether religious or simply faith in your own capacity, is the internal engine that keeps running when the external fuel runs out. So, we have the internal engine running. Now, how do we interact with the other cars on the road? Anderson takes us back to his childhood in Trenton, Tennessee. He talks about his father, a furniture store owner. There's this scene where young Mac is impatient because his dad is spending 20 minutes talking to the garbage collector. Just chatting. Treating him like a king. Later, his father drops the hammer. He says, "Son, you treat others the way you want to be treated." The golden rule. It's the oldest cliché in the book, right? But Anderson argues that it is the secret to a smooth life. If you ignore it, life becomes tasteless and boring. Why? Because you disconnect yourself from humanity. This leads to the concept of altruism. The idea that helping others is actually a selfish act, in the best possible way, because it feeds your own soul. He tells the story of Oral Lee Brown. This woman was a real estate agent, making a modest living. She meets a begging child in 1987. She doesn't just give him $1. She adopts an entire first-grade class. She commits to saving $10,000 a year, her own money, to put these kids through college. Think about the scale of that. One normal person, changing the destiny of dozens of families. It highlights the gap between saying you care and doing something about it. We often think we need to be millionaires to be philanthropists. Anderson says no. You just need to care enough to sacrifice. But, and here is the warning, you cannot pour from an empty cup. You have to manage the silent killer, stress. Anderson is very practical here. He argues that you cannot avoid stress, but you must control it. His prescription is physical. A sharp mind only exists in a vigorous body. You need to move. You need to flush the stress chemicals out of your blood. You need private time. No phone, no email, just nature. He argues that adults need to play just as much as children do. If you don't play, you break. And speaking of playing, this brings us to the final, and perhaps most beautiful, section of the book's philosophy. The concept of youth and simplicity. We live in a culture obsessed with anti-aging creams and Botox. We are terrified of the number on our driver's license. But Anderson flips the script. He references a speech by Jim Valvano, the famous basketball coach who was dying of cancer. Valvano said, "Enjoy every moment. Live with enthusiasm." Anderson brings in Samuel Ullman's essay to argue that youth is not a time of life, it is a state of mind. It is a matter of the will. You can be 20 years old and old if you are cynical and bored. You can be 80 years old and young if you are curious and hopeful. He says, "Time wrinkles the skin, but indifference wrinkles the soul." That is a line to write down. Indifference wrinkles the soul. So, how do we stay young? We have to protect our childlike soul. Think about a child. They are playful. They have limitless dreams. They have no inhibition. They are intuitive. Somewhere around age 15, the world beats this out of us. We become serious. We become realistic. We start pruning our own branches to fit into the box society built for us. Anderson uses the metaphor of pruning a tree to explain simplicity. If a tree has too many branches, the sap is diluted. It produces mediocre fruit. If you prune the excess, the sap is concentrated. You get big, sweet fruit. Our lives are overgrown trees. We are chasing glamour, the mansion, the car, the status. We are drowning in the thick of thin things. We need to apply the 80-20 rule. Identify the 20% of things causing 80% of your stress, and cut them off. Identify the 20% of things bringing you 80% of your joy, and double down on them. Simplicity isn't about poverty. It's about focus. It's about clearing the weeds so the flowers can grow. And finally, to keep that soul young and that life simple, you need one final tool: forgiveness. Anderson calls forgiveness the key to release us from the chains of hatred. If you are holding a grudge, you are drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Anger clouds your judgment. It wastes your time, that precious dash we talked about earlier. Forgiveness is the glue that holds the community together, and it is the detergent that cleans your own heart. So let's zoom out. Let's look at the whole picture Mac Anderson has painted for us. He starts with the internal choice, attitude. You are Sam the receptionist, choosing to see the world as wonderful. He moves to the mechanism, discipline. You are feeding the good wolf and writing contracts with yourself to endure the pain of change. He expands to the interpersonal, the dash. You are the cashier with the smile, the father talking to the garbage collector, the woman sending kids to college. He secures it with resilience. You are Lincoln, losing over and over again but never stopping. And he wraps it in lifestyle. You are pruning your life of the unnecessary, laughing to stay healthy, and refusing to let your soul get wrinkled by indifference. This is the miracle life. It is not a life without pain. It is not a life without failure. It is a life of intention. Anderson's message ultimately is that you are the architect. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are the master of your response. So, here is my challenge to you today. When this podcast ends, and the silence rushes back in, don't just go to the next task. Take 30 seconds. Do the mirror test. Look at yourself and ask, which wolf am I feeding right now? Ask yourself, if my life ended today, what would my dash say? And then make a choice. Choose passion. Choose enthusiasm. Choose to be the person who lights up the room. Because as Mac Anderson shows us, that choice changes everything. Thank you for listening. Go out there and live that dash.